given everything that's in the museum, the totality of it, there might be some that would say that a complaint about the 7-minute film, given everything that's there, might seem to be making a lot out of a small thing. Lots of museums have videos, and it's often the last thing that people visiting the museum might remember from their visit to that place. Reverend Brian?
Yes, thank you. I want to point you to the review in the New York Times this morning, where it emphasizes the gift of the museum is the very emotional nature of it. The way it takes you down, the way it's almost like you are entering a grave yourself. And the extraordinary, the memorabilia, the images, just that very thing in and of itself leads to the question, who do I blame for this atrocity? So it's not just that it's a 7-minute film, it is the one thing in there that suggests who you are to blame. And to do that, it requires the kind of depth and nuance and sophistication that the rest of the museum has, because it's a very delicate and difficult, complex question, and they don't go anywhere near addressing it. So we're asking for the same kind of intelligence to be applied to that video as was for the rest of the museum.
Also know, just quickly, also know that over 50 million people are visitors in New York, and they expect millions to come through this exhibition. And they're going to take these stories back home to their little towns and villages and cities around the world. So you don't want this misrepresentation really to propagandize the entirety of the world. Yes, sir.
Yeah, right here. Yeah.
Can you explain specifically what the edits are that you would like to see take place that would then make this film acceptable to you? How you would, the exact wording that you would like to see replaced in current narrative?
Yes. Well, I think some of the other academics could also speak to this question of this terminology. I think we start from the point that the terms Islamism, jihadism are not universally accepted by scholars of terrorism. They're also terms that are used somewhat more in the West than in the Arab and the Muslim world. I think the edits are, it's not a specific edit, change this to that. It would be an effort by a group of scholars to think, how can we give historical context to Al-Qaeda's emergence over many decades, over the ideologies over many decades. Perhaps larger exhibits are needed as well. But certainly the term Islamism is seen as problematic by many people for associating Islam and terrorism or this political ideology that may not apply to Al-Qaeda. And if it is done, then I think more context are needed. Jihadism is another question.
There's been another constructive suggestion which we've made, is that the same, it's almost like a contextual statement at the very beginning that says this video is about the historical rise of Al-Qaeda and does not relate to the history of Islam. It should not be used as justification for religious, ethnic, or any other kind of profiling. This statement was what the NYPD used to give a contextual piece before its radicalization report at the request of many in this community.
I'd like to respond just very briefly. Your question raises the major issue, is that there is no transparency. We are simply refused the opportunity to view the film. If we had the opportunity to view it, even now, some correctives could be taken. But to date, there's been a staunch refusal to allow, and I don't mean just general allowance for the open public, but for people who are leaders in the community, who have significant constituencies. There's been a flat out no, except for a select group of people that the museum chooses to allow to see that, which is another problematic.
I think just very briefly in answer to your question, Islamism as a term is generally used academically and in policy circles to describe political parties that use religion as a founding principle. And Al-Qaeda is not that. They're violent extremists. And it's important, I think, for the film to call Al-Qaeda what it is, and to not create conflations that, as I tried to say earlier, do a disservice to us as a democracy, but also make it harder for us to pursue our national security policy. Because when you consider how many people are going to see this movie, how it's going to influence their perceptions of where we stand in the world, it's very important that we do not give out impressions that are inaccurate and misleading.
I just want to make a statement that jihadist term that they have used it as a negative connotation. My jihad is to get justice for my son. That does not make me a terrorist. But the way they have used, I haven't seen the video, but from what I've heard, talked to people who have seen it, that it's a negative connotation, and that is not right. It should be removed.
Next question.
Someone over here. Anybody else?
Over here. I'm sorry. You?
Do you know about who made the film, how it was made, where their funding came from?
Yeah, I don't know too much about exactly who made it. Obviously, Brian Williams is the narrator. Yeah, I don't know, again, I'm assuming that the museum paid for it. So I have little information on that front.
There was an educational committee that was a component that was in charge of creating this film. Yes, sir?
I just have a question for you. You talk about being objective. It's an objective fact of history that the hijackers were instructed to read Islamic texts before they conducted their deed, which I understand has nothing to do with how you view Islam as a Muslim. I mean, I can't understand how Al-Qaeda, indicts all Muslims any more than, say, the KKK, using Christian texts, indicts all Christians. Could you explain how, you conflate, what the hijackers believed that they were doing in the name of Islam with, as an indictment against all Muslims?
Well, just real quickly, I'm going to let Mr. Deep, but Charlie Manson also told people to do things and they just believed him. So it's unfortunate that there are people who are suicidal and not very guided, and they can be manipulated. But I'll let Brother Mark speak more.
Just very quickly, I think your question makes the point, right? Nobody calls the KKK Christian terrorists. They don't call them Christian anything. They just call them the KKK. Similarly, the World Church of the Creator cites Christian texts and the like for committing hate crimes and the like. Nobody calls them, Christian terrorists. If you ever read popular news accounts, they're just called by their name, and I think that's the difference that's so injurious to 1.5 billion people who don't sympathize with terrorism at all.
The term suicidal terrorist, violent extremism, that is more of an accurate description of the actions. But to connect a religion to the actions of any individual is clearly stated in our amendments that we're protected against. Did you want to say what?
Yes, definitely. When we address the issue of 9/11, it comes to, like you said, the question, they used Islam as an excuse to attack, and they were told to recite the Quranic verses. Do we ever talk about Hitler's faith? We say Nazi, we don't say Catholic. He was a Catholic. Do we ever address that issue from that perspective? Who crucified Jesus? Do we ever question that? Bringing the fact that not only the Romans, but they were, Jews who crucified Jesus? Timothy McVeigh had a faith. We don't say about his faith. The Unabomber had a faith. It's just when the criminals have come from a Muslim faith, it becomes a big issue. Yes, Islamic terrorism, Islamism, jihadism, and this is prejudice, and this is bigotry. This is non-conducive to the security of our nation, and we need to get over this extreme, this is rhetorical statements that are talking points given to the media. Islamophobia is a big issue. It is also big business. And we need not go in the wrong direction. We need to stay positive.
Thank you, sister.
And sister, Karan, keep going.
I think you're exactly right. I mean, there's no getting around it, right? These are people who believed that what they were doing was religiously justified and sanctioned, and they acted in the name of the religion. I don't dispute that, and I don't think it's fair or reasonable to dispute that. I think my concern is that I want, when an American or anyone else goes through the museum, that when they watch the movie, they leave more informed, right? That this is not an emotional appeal, that sort of appeals to certain instincts or responses, but does not give you context or information. And I think Mr. Singh's point is actually exactly on point. If you're watching that film as a member of the community that's being discussed, do you feel victimized or threatened or concerned about your own personal safety? And I think that's where your point comes in as well, and would apply in any other context as well.